All right, hello and welcome to Iggy's first formal typography tip thing. I don't know what to call it, but I've been asked by a couple people what I think about when I am doing typography, so I thought, why not make a typography tip video? So here we are. There's a few things I'm going to cover. Today, I'm mostly going to be covering placement of text. This is just something that I have started to do just randomly, and I barely even think about it anymore, but it is something that can definitely help. First and foremost, if you need help with figuring out good placement for text, going to Pinterest even and just looking up a bunch of advertisements or pictures, you can kind of see the location of how they're doing typography and the placement of the text. That can usually help you at least start trying to figure out the best placement and where to put everything, as well as just kind of an idea of how I get some typography placements in my brain. Second, usually I split up my screen. I don't do this actually. Usually I don't have this little white bar, but I put that there just to kind of give you an idea. So this little white bar kind of splits up my screen into 4 quadrants. These 4 quadrants are very important when it comes to figuring out where typography goes, mostly because it is showing you where the characters are versus where I'm going to put my text. So for example, in this scene, we have Lucanus here on the right, which means that my top typography is not going to be anywhere on the right because I don't want to take away from that character and his placement. So for me, I usually go to this bottom corner. I don't usually go to this top half, mostly because when you go to that line of sight, once you get past that, it kind of looks a little bit awkward. Not that it always does, but it is an option. Here, if you're looking at my typography here, it is mostly in this. I don't usually try and cross this. However, because he's far enough away, I can put a little bit of typography on him and it's not going to detract from the character. That is one thing to consider, but most of my text is in the lower quadrant of this little scene. So here is another example. Solus is mostly on the right side of the scene, so my typography is going to be mostly on the left side. I technically could have brought it up a little bit more, but I also am thinking of where the eye line is going from Solus, so Solus is looking kind of down, so my text isn't too far down, but if you look, it's pretty much right where Solus is looking, so the eyes can track it and it doesn't look too far off. Here is another example. We have a character on the right. This time I have centered my text. I did add an effect so that there's 2 layers. It is the same word because the song allowed that with the beat, so I could actually create a replica of the word and it wouldn't be too much. But again, placement of the characters on the right, text is on the other side. So this one gets a little bit tricky. Again, I'm not looking at this top half because now the character is looking down. It would look strange to have the text here unless I masked the entire thing and wanted to do a full typography up here. That actually turned out really well here because it's just under my center line and I decided to repeat my word so you could see it through the entire thing. The reason I decided that is because the song doesn't allow for a lot of text. This part of the song is drawn out, and just having B by itself is not something that usually looks right in my head. So I just repeated it multiple times. I created a strip of white. Again, denied is mostly on this side. I'm looking at where the character is looking, which is down and to the left. So that is where I'm going to put most of my text. I did get a little bit off the center, which is okay because at that point it is not on the character's face. That is one huge thing when it comes to typography for me. The only way this could be acceptable is if you have an outline of a text. That would have also worked, but I didn't do that at that point because I hadn't really been messing with it too much when I created this edit. But I definitely probably would have made the plain white background and then done the outline here for my typography if I had thought of it. So this one, again, the character is looking down, this time at his hand. However, I don't want to take away from that hand. Don't want to go above the eye line, and I don't want to distract from his hand holding the knife. So that leaves only one spot, which is here. Again, I am lined up with my line. I'm not above, because again, he's looking down, he's not looking up. We don't want to detract from here. So line, my 4 quadrants, he's mostly on the right side, need to be on the left. So this one is, the reason I brought in this one is because the characters are not technically on the right side, but kind of in the center. So the main focal point of the edit or the video is in the center. So I don't want to take away from that center aspect, but I do want to add my text. And when I'm looking at my text, there's a lot of words. So instead of making it go all the way over across the entire thing, I'm going to just make it so it is in one side of the edit. I'm not crossing this line when I am doing this. You can do it sometimes and it can work out well. But just be careful when you are going back and forth with your typography. Sometimes it can look a little busy. Here, at least, you have the entire line if you look at it here. And I also have bolded specific parts of the words to bring attention to those words, which is something you can do. I even just bolded the no in nothing just to bring attention to it. Now here, again, we have that same idea. Usually when I am doing these bolded words, it's when I have a lot of words or I'm doing a double layer of words. So in this, I am doing a double layer of the words. I look over here, I'm doing a double layer of the words. I have bolded the most important word in my text. That helps kind of just bring attention to the words I want attention to. For this one, I know he is looking over here, but with this edit, it's definitely all about creating an uncanny valley. So sometimes it is okay to kind of think about that. If he is mostly on, if we do my little square, he's mostly in the middle with some little part in here. So I don't want to take this half of the edit. I'm going to be focusing more on the right side because I have more space on that side for my typography. This one, we again have that gaze. He's looking back. This time he is mostly, the attention is drawn to the top right. So when I am going to be doing my typography, he's looking down to the left. So I'm going to be putting my typography down to the left. Again, I have a double layer. This song was a bit slower, so I wanted to create emphasis with the placement as well as me bolding specific words. And I did that with pass. Now this one, okay, so sometimes when you are doing typography placement, you can be thinking of scenes right next to each other. So if we look at this, I start off, he's looking down and to the left again. He is mostly in the center, but his head is mostly in the right quadrant. So we need to be over on the left side because I don't want to detract from where he is. Plus, if you look at the light is mainly focused on this section here, not down here. So I don't want to bring attention to this area here because it's the dark spot in the edit. Over here is also dark, so I'm going to avoid using those two areas because I don't want attention to be drawn to something that isn't supposed to be the main focal point of that scene. So if we look over here, again, we have mostly on the right side. So mostly on the right, center right, still on the right, I can still keep my text there. So that is one thing to consider when you are thinking of text. If you have a song that's over a long, or a certain lyrics that are over 2 scenes, when you are placing your typography, you need to be thinking of where that placement is. So I also try and add a motion to it just because the clip is zooming in and out, and I want to make sure my typography kind of feels like it fits into the scene. Now this one, we have a character down in the left quadrant, and they are now looking up. However, I don't want it to put it all the way up here because if we keep the clip moving, we have a little bit of some characters here. Now you can't see their faces up here. However, I don't want to detract from that since that is technically where he's looking. So we have a character looking up, so we're going to put our text slightly up from where he is, but I don't want to cover these faces because that is important for the emotional impact of the scene. That is why my typography looks the best here. I don't want to bring it down here because again, that's more of a dark spot. It kind of detracts from the scene. I want people to still be looking up. For this scene, we again have the character. If we put our little square mostly on the right, we are on the left. One thing that you can do with typography is repeat words. In this context, I decided to repeat words. I did it again with this one, character on the right, typography on the left. And that way I can also kind of just add a little flair to some of the typography. So it's not the same exact typography every single time. You do have the repeat in the words and they're both moving down. So that is one thing to consider with your typography. Characters on the right, repetition can be one way to fix if there's a specific word that doesn't show as much impact. I do sometimes make it so certain parts of it are different than the rest just to bring attention to it. So this one, I had it opposite, so it was bolded first, and then I had the outline for this one versus this one, which is the opposite. You can bring attention to specific words when you do that, an outline versus something that's filled in. So this is another thing that you can consider when you are doing typography and the song is changing and the lyrics are changing, but you have scenes that you want to put right next to each other that are very similar and the characters are in fact dead in the center. So I can go on either side of these, but I also don't want to put too much typography, especially because I added this little effect here with this overlay. So my typography is over here. And then with my clip, I switch over to the other side. So we are going from one side to the other side, changing the typography as you go. Again, it is the same effect, but now we're flipping sides. So character still in the center, character in the center, the overlay effect, my typography has now switched sides. That is something that you can do. I did it here as well. This time it was on the lower side. When your character's head is at the top here and it cuts off, you do not want to put typography above that section. So if we are looking here, he is mostly on the left side. Of course, my typography is in the bottom right. We have a character here. As you can see, the typography is down in the corner. He's mostly in the left side. Now his eyesight is going straight across. When he is looking straight across like that, I am not going to go above that line. So right there, that is his eye line. I am not doing anything above that line. All of my typography is going to be in the bottom half of the screen because I don't want to take away from his gaze. So this is the best spot to put it. And again, we have that switch over just like in the last one. And same idea, if I were to do this, I would move my line down. So that is where his eyes are. So I would not put anything above his eye line, especially because we also have a Jungbei in the background and we don't want to cover his beautiful face either. So if we have that eye line is here, I'm not going to put any typography above that eye line. So if we continue on, we have this section here. Now, again, eye line, you technically don't have to do that. This time he's looking down and across, so I wouldn't be able to put my typography down here because it would just take away from the scene. So again, I would go back to this. He is mostly on the left side. I'm going to be putting things on the right side, and this time it is centered because I don't have an eye line to match up with. And again, we're going to go over to the other side. Now, this part is a little interesting. So again, center, it is mostly straight across from that center viewpoint. Now, in this scene, I actually had two audios going. I had the music going up here. So music, these are the lyrics. And down here, I was doing voiceovers. So all the voiceovers that were said were down at the bottom. I would be careful with this if you are going to do voiceovers and typography with those voiceovers. I would not mix and match them just because it can get a little confusing. So for this context, I just did the typography for the voiceovers down here. But you can play with that a little bit more. There's no rules here. These are just all suggestions. So just think of it as a suggestion. All of these are just suggestions. These are just things that I have noticed that tend to look better when I am doing typography. This is another one where I had the subtitles, and if you look, I always have these title and action safe outlines here, just because it helps with the placement of the text. I'm usually never going to go under that line here. So technically I should have brought this typography up just a little bit more, but I'm assuming I was afraid it was going to get into his face. I didn't want to cover Inho's face. So I put the text here just because if I had brought it up a little bit more, I would have been getting close to his chin, and we don't want any chin words. Same thing here. So I'm thinking of the placement, and then since this is going to be a wide shot, I didn't want to take away from this wide shot. So I'm here, character is center, I can put my text on the right, on the left, or down at the bottom. But because my next scene has them on the right and the left, which are complete opposites to this scene, so we have our character in the center, characters on opposite sides, I didn't want to break that placement. So my typography would go in the bottom, just so I'm not ruining where the characters are. So this here, the reason we have this is because our character is dead center. So if we look, the character is dead center, right? So I could put it on the right, I could put it on the left, or because the character's head is far enough down, I could put it above the character. Depending on the placement of the character, that changes on if I'm going to put text at the top. The only time I usually put text at the top is if the character themselves, top of their head is visible in the scene, then I will put text up here. It's also usually when the characters are centered and the full character is shown. But for example here, again, we have the character in the center. I could put it down here, over here, or I could put it on top of the character. Since they're dead center, they're far enough away, I'm going to put it on top of the character. Next, we have our center. Gotta love that center. These are for if I have no other place to put the typography, I will put it dead in the center. And that is a-okay. You can totally do that. And I do that quite often when I'm running out of ideas. So my characters are there. I like adding a little bit of a negative effect so that it kind of adds a little bit more. Here I do the same thing. I don't really have a good placement because the character is looking kind of off to the, like kind of down in center. So I could have put it down here. But she's also reaching out. I didn't want to do that. Over here and here doesn't just look right because the character themselves are the main focal point. They're too close to the center of the screen. Their head is at the top, so I'm not going to put anything above that eye line. So that leaves dead center. And since the character is dead center, my next scene, I'm going to just change my text, and I'm going to keep it in that dead center. Same idea, the horns are too high up, so I don't want to cross that eye line sight because the top of the head is at the top of the screen. I could have put it down at the bottom if I wanted to. Technically, I could have put it right or left, but because this one was kind of a little tricky to put right or left, felt more natural to keep that center part. So this one, if you are into masking, you can definitely mask when it comes to typography. Masking out characters is a good way to put typography behind them. It's super easy. Again, it is centered. So if we look at my centered one, the character is mostly centered. They're a little bit off, but because they're mostly centered, I want my typography to be in the center as well. This is also a time where you could technically do an outline over the character, but because it's not too close to the character, I decided to just put it in the background. Plus it adds to the wisp of kind of this fog-like setting I was trying to create in the clip. Here's another example. We have the character, the top of the head touching the top, so I'm not going to go above that eye line if I wanted to. The character is dead center or close enough to the center that I would either put it on the right or the left if I wanted to. However, I decided to mask out the character and put the typography in the background. The reason I did this is because the scene right before this was Gyun not smiling, and then I transformed it into him smiling. So I wanted to keep that aspect of the characters standing in the same spot, kind of aligned. So that's why in the background, that is where I put most of the text, was because I wanted that smile and no smile to be the main focal point of that clip. Here's another way you can mask out a character to kind of show the placement. We have Will here in the center this time. I masked him out. I wanted to have some typography in the front and the back. Now, because he is looking down, I don't want my typography up near his face because his eyes is going down. So that's why when I placed the text for this one, it was a little further down than these other two, because where the characters are looking matter, because here she's looking straight at us. Here, Gyun is looking straight at us. Here, he is not looking straight at the camera. Instead, he is looking down. So my typography is going to be a little further down. And the last two types of typography placement I'm going to be talking about is this circle effect that I actually really love doing. Mostly, the only time I do this circle typography is when the center of the screen is the main focal point that I am trying to get people's attention at. So if we look at our quadrants, our main character is kind of in the center, so I can use that as well. A few other small things that I will bring up is movement option of typography. All of my text is moving unless I am trying to create suspense. So, for example, in this scene, we have James from Silent Hill. The song was eerie. The song was trying to create suspense. So I'm not going to add movement. I am adding a little twitch effect to the typography, which is something that I might do in a later videos to kind of show how to do that one. My actual movement of the typography isn't very much. It's very stagnant. Even in this scene, it's very stagnant other than the letters themselves. So that one I did not use movement. But if you look at most of my other clips, my typography is usually always moving or having a slight movement to it. So creating that motion definitely helps with your video because the video itself is usually moving. So the scenes that you have something happening that is moving. Again, so here, again, my typography isn't moving, but because I wanted an eerie feeling to it, I didn't have that typography moving. But here, even my letters are moving. So my letters are even moving in these ones. But I have usually movement in all of my text. So here we have the circle effect. So if we look here, the text is moving to the right. You can also add letters in the background if you would like to. Again, this was another one where I masked out a character. But because I didn't want this to affect the character, I did add a giant C in the background. That is something you can do depending on the style you're trying to recreate. But I do have movement in most of my scenes. It also depends on the number of words I have on the screen. If I have a lot of words on the screen, I'm going to be careful with the amount of movement I have for my text. If I have a lot of text, then I'm going to just usually add a slight movement to the letters versus a movement to the entire word. But if you look here, my movement is moving slightly to the right versus slightly to the left. So my text is usually always moving just because the clips are always moving as well. So yeah, that is my first typography tips video. If you have any questions, you can totally leave a comment. All of these are suggestions. They are not rules. The way I edit is just these are things that I have noticed that I personally like better when it comes to typography, but that doesn't mean any other typography is incorrect. Editing is a hobby and a fun hobby at that, so continue to enjoy however you do typography. These are just small things that I have figured out through trial and error, so that is why I do it this way.